Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're in Mark's Gospel, and we're reading today about the crucifixion of Jesus, the act of crucifixion, and we're in chapter 15, verse 21. We're going to read through verse 32. They pressed into service a passer-by coming from the country, Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus, that he might bear his cross. And they brought him to a place called Golgotha, which translated means place of a skull. And they tried to give him wine mixed with myrrh, but he didn't take it. And they crucified him and divided up his garments among themselves, casting lots to determine what each should take. And it was the third hour when they crucified him. And the inscription of the charge against him read, King of the Jews. And they crucified 2 robbers with him, one on the right hand and one on the left. And those passing by were hurling abuse at him, wagging their heads, saying, Ha! You who were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, you save yourself. Come down from the cross. In the same way the chief priests with the scribes were also mocking him among themselves, saying, He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let this Christ, this King of Israel, now come down from the cross so that we may see and believe. And those who were crucified with him were casting the same insult at him. Okay, so in any reenactment, that people do of Jesus carrying his cross, it's always cross, is over his shoulder, and like Jesus carried the whole cross, but that would not have been what had happened. He had a cross piece. He was either already tied to him or he was carrying it like this, but he would have carried his own cross piece. He was too weak to do that. And so they impressed a man named Simon of Cyrene. Cyrene is in current-day Libya. He's a North African fellow, and his sons are named in the text, which means that either his sons were known in the Christian community or his sons in some way were known to the listeners, Alexander and Rufus, which they have Greek names, of course, they are his children, and they're mentioned, which is an interesting detail. They bring him to Golgotha, a hell outside the city, where they perform these executions. As we said yesterday, there's no way to identify what hill that is, if it even still exists. It's been a lot of earth moving around the outside of the walls of the old city of Jerusalem over the years, and so it's probably impossible to identify where Golgotha is, or even to know if it still exists. They offered him wine mixed with myrrh. Myrrh is an expensive tree resin. It's one of the gifts that the wise men brought to Jesus. We're told about in Matthew, and in the Gospel of Matthew, and he was not offered that by the Romans. We know from other sources that Jewish women, pious women, as an act of service to Jews who were being executed by the Romans, they would mix this myrrh, which has a natural narcotic in it, this tree resin, with wine, to people who are about to be executed as a sedative for them, to dull the pain of it a bit, and maybe to quicken their death. But Jesus refuses that. We read that the soldiers are casting lots for his garments. There are several sources that let us know this was standard procedure. This is one of the perks of having to do crucifixion duty, which was not something anybody really relished doing. And it's also something that's referenced in Psalm 22, which we'll talk about next time. And so there's that. These robbers, these bandits, this is the word Josephus uses for terrorist. I don't know that these are actually guys who are being executed for breaking and entering. These are guys who are being executed as outlaws. They may not have committed robbery at all. In fact, they may not be any different than Barabbas. Barabbas is called an insurrectionist. Mark talks about the insurrection like it's something his listeners ought to know about. and these guys were probably involved in some way in similar activities, if not the same particular activity that Barabbas was arrested for. We know more about them from the other Gospels. We don't know much about them here, but we know that they're there. And then we have this quote from Isaiah 53, verse 12, in our text today, and that's interesting, because he's writing to a Gentile audience, excuse me, and for some reason he doesn't quote Psalm 22. At least not yet. Jesus will quote Psalm 22, but he does quote Isaiah, and that's an interesting thing to notice. I don't know why that's there. So there is that, and then and then after we read about the two robbers, we have the mocking and the scourging, and of course the mocking and not the scourging, but the mocking and the humiliation, and the mocking itself recalls the words of Psalm 22. In fact, in Matthew's Gospel, the people use a direct quote from Psalm 22, which Jesus will quote directly next time we are together. Okay. Well, today Jesus is on the cross. Next time, we'll read the things that he says from the cross. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes.